objective. Yeah. Now, if we look at the Muslim historians, because Muslims had a very highly developed, in some ways, the Muslim civilization is a precursor to European, intellectual endeavor. The Muslims, specifically, biographies and history was something that the Muslim scholars really focused on. Part of that came about because of the specialization of the Muslim scholars, because they wanted to verify the hadith. Yeah, so early Muslim scholars were very concerned to understand how can we find out which hadith are authentic and which hadith are weak or fabricated. Yeah, that was a massive scholarly endeavor of the early generation of Muslims, because very soon after the Prophet ﷺ, there were a huge amount of fabricated hadith. Yeah, and so Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, was the first one to actually write a book just with Sahih hadith. However, even before him, the hadith scholars had been very concerned in verifying the authenticity of hadith. The only thing he did was he actually compiled it into one book, but it doesn't mean that the scholars before him weren't concerned about that. That was the whole point of isnad, yeah, to get the chain of narrators and to analyze, are the narrators in the chain, are they reliable, are they strong, and so on. So this was the Muslim, it's, according to some of our scholars, this is what actually differentiated Muslims from other people as well, that we have isnad. As one of the early scholars said, لولا الإسناد لقال من شاء ما شاء. If it was not for the isnad, anyone could say whatever they wanted. Yeah? If it was not for the isnad, anyone could just say whatever they wanted. In other words, the isnad is the protection. It's the what you'd say in modern terms, the sort of evidence base, or the proof that what is being said is actually true. Yeah. So if someone comes along and says that the Prophet ﷺ used to wear a green turban, let's say, okay, that's just a statement. How do we know it's true? We have to find out who is the person making the statement. Did he himself witness that from the Prophet ﷺ? Or is there a chain of narrators? Yeah. And if there's a chain, then let's go back through the chain and find out, who does the eyewitness report go back to? Obviously, the eyewitness report will always go back to a Sahabi, because by definition, the Sahabi is someone who saw the Prophet ﷺ. More accurately, it's someone who the Prophet ﷺ saw, because Sahaba could be blind, so he didn't actually see the Prophet. So the most accurate description is someone that the Prophet ﷺ has laid eyes upon is a Sahabi. So then you have to look at the chain. The Sahaba has narrated it to so-and-so, to so-and-so, to so-and-so. Every single person in the chain has to be reliable transmitter in terms of their memory and their truthfulness, right? And then and only then can we accept that, okay, this is now a reliable eyewitness report or hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. And this didn't just apply to the Prophet ﷺ, this also applied to any report, even from the Sahaba, from the students of Sahaba, and so on, right? So, for example, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu is known as one of the great Sahaba who gave a lot of commentary on the Quran. Because he was from one of the younger Sahaba, normally it's the younger Sahaba that lived for a long time after the Prophet ﷺ. So they become the ones who transmitted most of the knowledge from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People like Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Sayyidah Aisha, Anas ibn Malik, Abu Huraira, all of them were from the younger category of Sahaba. And because they were younger, they lived for many, many years. Anas ibn Malik is actually considered one of the last ones to die of the Sahaba. So they were teaching the Sunnah, transmitting it to the next generation. The older Sahaba, like Sayyidina Umar, Abu Bakr, these people, they were actually the more knowledgeable, but they didn't live for very long after the Prophet ﷺ, so there's less hadith from them than there are from the younger Sahaba, if you see what I mean. Anyway, if you take someone like Ibn Abbas, he's known as Mufassir of Quran. The Prophet ﷺ specifically singled him out as one of the younger Sahaba that understood the Quran best. So a lot of the tafsir that we have goes back to Ibn Abbas and his students. Yeah. So his students like Mujahid and others, they're some of the main narrators of the tafsir of the Sahaba from Ibn Abbas. So whenever we have a tafsir from Ibn Abbas, we say, all right, it's coming from Ibn Abbas through one of his students, and then from the student of the student, and then it's written down by, say, the next generation, right? So that's the isnad that we have. The isnad is not only for hadith, but for all historical eyewitness reports. That became the tradition of the Muslim historians. Yeah, so for any eyewitness report, unless the historian has taken it straight from the eyewitness themselves, there will always be an isnad, yeah, to that eyewitness himself. So this became the very, very established tradition of the Muslim historians and biographers, that any report, any eyewitness report is always given with the isnad to the historian themselves. Whether that be one person, two person, sometimes it can be 10 people. Yeah. And now the Muslim historians, sometimes they may just present all the eyewitness reports with the isnad, but they don't give much commentary of their own opinion. Yeah. Sometimes they may give their own opinions as well, especially if the eyewitness reports have different contradictory, which can easily happen. Eyewitness reports can often be contradictory by their nature. So when this happens, sometimes the historian himself will give his opinion. After giving the different reports, he will say, in summary, the strongest opinion is so and so and so and so. I'll take a quick question. Khadija, you got your hand up?
Yeah, 2 more questions from the chat. So what about people like Ibn Ishaq, who wrote the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ? Did he have an isnad, and do we consider such works to have the same robustness of authenticity?
Yeah, good question. I mean, even the Seerah writers, they normally bring the isnads for what they say. Now, there are some that are written without the isnads, but that is only done in the context where the authors are trying to give a short version or a summary of their findings. So sometimes they will present it without isnad, but it's quite rare. If you look at, for example, Jalaluddin Suyuti's Tarikh al-Khulafa, one of the famous historical works of history, Jalaluddin Suyuti, rahimahullah, is one of our great scholars, historians, and masters of hadith, comes to quite from one of the later period. So Jalaluddin Suyuti is probably around, he's around 800 or 900 Hijri, I believe. So that's quite later on, for our scholars. But he's one of the last really, really big scholars of hadith, Jalaluddin Suyuti. He's one of our really, really outstanding ulama of the later period. to the extent that his books, he's written on virtually every subject, and his books on nearly every subject are considered standard textbooks that are studied in many madrasas today. He was one of the last great masters of hadith, meaning those that have memorized hundreds of thousands of hadith. In his own autobiography, Jalaluddin Suyuti, rahmullah, he says that I memorized, I think it's about 200,000, he mentioned, 200,000 hadith. And he said, then I couldn't find any more to memorize. Yeah, he literally memorized every single hadith he could find to memorize. And he memorized so much that he believed that he had become mujtahid mutlaq, what the later scholars defined as mujtahid mutlaq is a mujtahid, a scholar who has absolute ijtihad. In other words, he's not tied down to any methodology of one of the four previous schools, any of the previous schools of ijtihad or fiqh. However, he was then challenged by some of his peers because the thinking at the time was that there's no absolute ijtihad following the Salaf period, that the level of knowledge never got to that point of absolute ijtihad. So he was challenged by some of his peers on being an absolute mujtahid. And later on, he backed down on that opinion. And so he's considered to be a Shafi'i, follower of the Shafi'i school. But anyway, the point being that one of his great works, Tarikh al-Khulafa, the history of the Khulafa, he wrote the history of the Khulafa up to his time. And if you read the section on the Khulafa Rashidun, for example, it's quite concise. And he doesn't bring isnads. He just gives like a running commentary on the life of Abu Bakr, then Umar, Uthman, Ali, but he doesn't bring the isnads. Now, obviously, he knows the isnads because he's a great master of hadith. That's his field, But in that particular work, because he wants to keep it concise, he's given like a summary of the events, very short as well, like literally a few pages for each of the Khalifas. Now, the value of that is immense because what that means is that with all of his immense knowledge of all of the different narrations, he's come to those conclusions, and that's like that's basically his analysis and conclusion of what actually happened. Because the source materials often are very contradictory, especially later on when you had a lot of the fighting amongst the Muslims, as we'll see later on, for example, in the time of Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, the Sahaba, there was civil war. Yeah, so some of the Sahaba, they started fighting each other. So at this point, as you can imagine, the historical evidences are very, very conflicting. There were some that were fanatic on Ali's side. There were some that were more fanatic on the other side. And so a lot of people, a lot of narrations about what happened were often conflicting, depending on which side you were on, for example. So one of the values, so if you read, for example, Tabari is a very, very large history. I think it's 40 or 50 volumes, yeah, Tabari's history. And it's considered one of the earliest and most accurate sources of early Islamic history. Tabari, even in Western academia, it's considered like the golden source of early Islamic history. So Tabari, in distinction to Suyuti that I was just talking about, if you look at Tabari's account of what happened in the Khulafa Rashidun in the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman, he gives a very, very long and detailed account, and he brings all of the eyewitness reports with all of the isnads. Yeah. So if you read Tabari's account of, one of the, say, Sayyidina Ali, for example, you will see all of the different accounts of the battles and often conflicting evidence, yeah, of what happened. So what is Tabari doing? Why is Tabari doing that? Because Tabari, his job was to collect all of the eyewitness evidence with the isnad, even if some of them were weak, even if some of them conflicted with others, and even if some of them contradicted Tabari's own opinion. Yeah, his job as a historian was to collect all of that evidence. So what he has done, and this is what many of our Muslim historians did, they did this really, really amazing job of collecting the eyewitness reports, and with the isnads, so that other scholars could look at them, analyze them, examine them, and try to come to understandings. Now, Tabari obviously has his own conclusions as well on what, for example, he considers to be the stronger isnads, and what he considered actually happened. And sometimes he will summarize, say, a chapter, and he will summarize it and say, his own opinion about what actually happened. So that's an example of the two different approaches. With Sayuti, we just have like a summary, but it's like a summary of his analysis of and that's valuable in itself, because he's someone who has studied, memorized, understood all of the different eyewitness accounts, but he's then come to a conclusion and he's presented that in a summarized manner. So I hope that answered the question. So basically, what we have in the Muslim, in the Arabic, primarily Arabic sources, is an immensely rich source of what is called source material, primary sources, eyewitness reports, incomparable to any other history of the Middle Ages. Because remember, when we talk about Islamic history, we're talking about Middle Ages, as the West calls it, the Middle Ages. Compared to that, in the West, they have nothing compared to what the Muslims have, historical data of that period. Yeah. It became a very much, what we call books of biographies, ilm al-rijal, the biographies. Even though it started with the biographies of the narrators of hadith, it became a very vast tradition. So the Muslim scholars, they would write the biographies of every generation. So all of the notable people, not just scholars, not just hadith narrators, but politicians, the khalifas, any notable people in the society, they would write their biographies. And this became a tradition in all the different cities as well. So you have Tariq Damishq, the history of Damascus, Tariq Baghdad, the history of all the people in Baghdad. It's amazing. It's untapped. Yeah, for people who are going into history like Zakaria, if you do go into doing history, a degree in history in this, I really recommend learn Arabic, because the Arabic sources are massive and they're untapped right now. People haven't even scratched the surface of the eyewitness reports and things like that we have. But the methodology is very precise that the Muslim historians had, like Tabari. They will bring the eyewitness reports with the isnad, and Tabari will not touch that. Even if he totally disagrees with that, he will faithfully bring that evidence for you. And when he gives his own opinion, it's completely separate from the eyewitness reports, right? So it's actually a very scientific methodology, if you think about it. And in many ways, much more valuable than the way Western historians go about presenting history that we're going to look at in a minute. Yeah, because Tabari, you can differentiate what is Tabari's opinion and what are the eyewitness reports. It's completely separate, right? However, the negative side of the Muslim historians is that it can be very cumbersome and very boring. Yeah, I don't know if any of you have tried, but I have tried to read Tabari and, just sections of those books. For example, recently I was doing some research into the Battle of the Camel. It's a battle that took place between Sayyidina Ali and on the other side was Sayyidah Aisha, one of our great, obviously, one of the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. This was the first Muslim civil war. So if you look at the Battle of the Camel, it was called the Battle of the Camel because Sayyidah Aisha was on the back of a camel and she was actually riding into battle with a veil on top of the camel. She didn't actually fight herself, but she was leading, the forces, the army. If you look at Tabari, this battle in Arabic is called al Jamal, obviously, Ma'rikat al Jamal. I can't remember, but it was about, I think it was 300 pages, over 300 pages he has, just on this battle, the Battle of the Camel. So in those over 300 pages, he's brought all of the eyewitness reports, from Ali's side, Aisha's side, the people who were neutral as well, because many people were neutral and they want to just be objective. So he brings all of so you can imagine trying to get through that. And every incident, there's so many different eyewitness reports of every single little incident that take place. So reading that with the isnad, with the chains of narrators, can be very cumbersome. It's not, if you're just someone, a layperson who wants to read history and find out what happened, you're not going to want to go through that 350 pages just to try to understand what happened in the Battle of the Camel. You can go to Suyuti, who writes about the Battle of the Camel in one paragraph. Do you see where I'm coming from now? So that's why Suyuti knows the 350 pages because he's a hadith master. He's memorized a lot of those narrations himself. But he summarized it in one paragraph for us. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about here.